In every story about the von der Linde gang, there comes a moment when the dust settles, the guns quiet, and all that remains is a question about choices, about fate, and about the breaking of a man who once believed he could outsmart the world. Friends, welcome. Pull your chair closer to the fire, settle into the warmth of the night, and let us step together into one of the most defining tragedies in the entire tale of Red Dead Redemption 2. If you love stories like this, deep dives into Arthur's world, the truth behind the missions, and the hidden meanings Rockstar left in the shadows, make sure you are subscribed. And if you feel the weight of Arthur's journey the way so many players do, leave a like. It helps more people find these stories, and it keeps this channel alive as we walk deeper into the lore of the Dying West. Now, let us begin. There are cities in this world built on iron, money, and the illusion of progress. But Saint-Denis, the great industrial jewel of Lemoyne, was built on something colder, on ambition, on corruption, on the belief that the world belonged not to the strong, but to the civilized. It was in this place of smoke-choked skies, clattering trams, and endless noise that the von der Linde gang made their boldest, most disastrous choice. A city Dutch admired and despised in equal measure. A city where he believed he could fool civilization itself. And for a time, under the lantern glow of those sprawling boulevards, it seemed as if he just might. St. Denis enters the game like a character, alive, humming, indifferent. Arthur notes its overwhelming nature in his journal, describing the sight of men rushing like they're all late for something unknown, and the strange sameness of its stone buildings. For a man raised under open skies, the city is suffocating. For Dutch, it is intoxicating. The gang arrives with hope, disguised as strategy. After the disaster at Valentine, the blood spilled in Rhodes, and the failed Braithwaite raid, Dutch clings to the idea of one final score. The mythical exit plan he repeats like scripture. His dream is simple: steal enough to disappear forever. But his execution of that dream, that is where the cracks begin to show. By the time we reach the mission Urban Pleasures, the Pinkerton thread is no longer a shadow. Agent Milton has begun appearing directly in cutscenes, confident, smug, and certain of the gang's downfall. Arthur senses this tightening noose long before Dutch admits it. He writes in his journal of something wrong with Dutch lately, noting how the man who once preached freedom now sounded distracted, consumed by thoughts he would not share. Yet Dutch is energized by Saint-Denis. He's hosting soirees with the mayor's associates, dancing with the wealthy, charming men like Angelo Bronte, a man he should never have trusted. The gang watches their leader begin to mimic the very people he despises. Men who hide violence behind wine glasses and polite smiles. The city becomes a mirror reflecting Dutch's evolving philosophy. He begins speaking not of survival, but of destiny, not of running, but of winning. But beneath this growing ambition lies a quiet tragedy. Hosea Matthews, Dutch's oldest friend, feels the change more painfully than anyone else. In the mission The Gilded Cage, Hosea expresses doubts about Bronte's intentions. He senses danger in the air, the way a seasoned hunter smells rain long before the clouds gather. His voice remains calm, but it carries an undertone Arthur has never heard from him before. Worry. Real, heavy worry. Walking through the gas-lit streets after the mayor's party, the gang feels almost like aristocrats themselves. Dutch is exhilarated. Hosea is uneasy. Arthur is torn between admiration and concern, and the city watches them all with cold detachment, as if waiting for the storm it knows is coming. Then comes the promise, the lie that sets everything in motion. Angelo Bronte gives Dutch the idea of the Saint Denis bank job. He calls it a simple, profitable opportunity, delivered with the oily confidence of a man who knows he is lying. Dutch believes him, or rather, Dutch wants to believe him. Arthur, far more grounded, trusts Hosea's instincts. But in this chapter of the story, Dutch no longer listens. In these early Saint Denis sequences, Rockstar shows us a shift subtle enough that players often miss it on the first playthrough. Dutch stops asking for advice. He begins giving orders. He stops weighing options. He starts pursuing the one that feels grand, dramatic, worthy of the legacy he imagines for himself. It is St. Denis, more than any gunfight or chase, that transforms Dutch from a visionary into a gambler. As the gang prepares for the bank, their temporary home at Doyle's Tavern becomes a staging point for the illusion of control. Dutch's voice is confident, his posture firm, his smile sharp. But Hosea keeps glancing at him, the way a father might look at a son who has begun running toward a cliff. Everything about this city is dangerous for them. The cramped streets, the public patrols, the Pinkertons watching from the smoke. But the most dangerous thing in St. Denis is Dutch's belief that he still understands the world. Arthur writes in his journal that something about Dutch's behavior troubles him. He sees Dutch planning not with logic, but with ego, not with caution, but with desire. And although the gang laughs and drinks inside the tavern, the truth is forming quietly beneath the noise. The Saint Denis job will not save them. It will not free them. It will not be the grand moment Dutch imagines. It will be the beginning of the end. And as the city lights flicker across the river, and as the trams screech through the night, Dutch van der Linde convinces himself that he is smarter than the men who built this city, smarter than the laws it upholds, smarter even than fate. He is wrong, and in the heart of St. Denis, the first stone of his downfall has already been laid, long before the streets of St. Denis erupted with gunfire, long before Dutch shouted desperate orders from the rooftop of a burning dream. The Pinkertons had already begun shaping the gang's fate. And at the center of that relentless pursuit stood a man whose presence lingers through Red Dead Redemption 2 like a cold wind. Agent Milton. He is not a complex villain. He is not theatrical, nor charming, nor tragic. He is something far more dangerous, a man who believes he is right. To understand why the St. Denis bank job was destined to fail, one must first understand the quiet, methodical hunt that led up to it. Milton had been gathering threads of the gang's existence since the Blackwater Massacre, a disaster that remained shrouded in mystery even within the game itself. Whatever happened on that ferry, whatever deals were broken, whatever blood was spilled, it gave Milton a trail soaked with purpose, and he never let it go. By the time the gang arrived in Lemoyne, Milton was no longer searching blindly. He had eyewitnesses, informants, surveillance on a gang's movements, aided by the growing influence of the Bureau of Investigation, a precursor to the FBI. Milton speaks of this openly during the mission Urban Pleasures, telling Arthur and Dutch that they've been watching them for months. It is one of the most revealing lines in the game, quietly slipped into the dialogue as the trolley rattles through the alleys of St. Denis. To the gang, the move to the city feels like a fresh start. To Milton, it is simply the next stage in the pursuit. When Dutch and Arthur ride the St. Denis tram during that mission, Milton's ambush feels sudden to the player. But the truth is the opposite. Nothing about it is sudden. It is calculated, timed, the culmination of months of observation and pressure. Every misstep of the gang becomes a clue. Every fight in Rhodes, every explosion near Shady Bell, every informant they threaten or spare. All of it builds a picture clearer than Dutch wants to believe. One of the most important overlooked details is the role of betrayal in fueling Milton's intelligence stream. In-game dialogue later confirms that Micah was feeding information, but at this moment in the story, during their time in St. Denis, the gang is unaware of the traitor in their midst. All they feel is the pressure. All they see is the tightening circle. But they cannot understand how Milton's men seem to know where to appear. Rockstar never spells out every detail, but the canon evidence paints a chilling picture. Milton was not following Dutch's plans. He was predicting them. This is why his presence grows more direct, more confident, why he no longer hides behind agents or scouts. He confronts the gang personally because he believes the chase is almost over. In the marshes of Lemoyne, Arthur hears local rumors of federal men combing the region, Pinkertons at the docks, Pinkertons in the alleys, Pinkertons in the saloons, always asking, always listening. The gang brushes these reports off as paranoia, but the truth is that Lemoyne is already saturated with government eyes by the time the gang steps foot in Saint Denis. And for Dutch van der Linde, this is a poison he does not taste until it is too late. There is a moment in urban pleasures that reveals more about Dutch's weakening instincts than any other. After Milton corners the trolley and mocks them through the open air, Dutch's response is not tactical. It is emotional. He shouts, curses, and orders Arthur to shoot their way out, as if sheer force can overpower a man who has an entire government behind him. Arthur, pragmatic as always, sees what Dutch refuses to acknowledge. Milton is not improvising. He has arranged every step of this confrontation. As the gunfight spills onto the rooftops and the trolley falls apart, the symbolism is unmistakable. Dutch's world, once built on careful planning, charm, and long-term strategy, is coming undone. The man who could once predict rivals' moves before they made them can now only react, improvising in a storm he created but no longer controls. And yet, despite this obvious shift, Dutch refuses to adapt. Arthur writes in his journal afterward that Dutch seems certain he can still outthink the world, even as it becomes painfully clear that the world has changed. Civilization has caught up. The old tricks do not work here. Milton understands this perfectly. He uses the systems of St. Denis, the rails, the alleys, the crowds, as a net. Dutch sees these systems as obstacles he can defy. Milton sees them as tools designed for men like him. The more the Pinkertons close in, the more Dutch retreats into a haze of grand ideas. He tells the gang that Milton is merely a pawn of the state, a man too foolish to comprehend Dutch's brilliance. But this isn't strategy, it's denial. Milton, for all his cruelty, has one quality Dutch no longer possesses: clarity. He tells Dutch plainly during their encounters, "This ends soon." He says it not as a threat, but as a fact. And behind him, The full machinery of federal power moves like a dark tide. Telegraphs, rail networks, urban policing, information sharing across state lines, something the gang had never faced at this scale. This shift is historical, grounded in the late American 19th century. Old world outlawry cannot survive in a modern city like St. Denis, not when the law carries notebooks, photographs, records, witnesses, and the rising belief that no man is above the state. Milton embodies that new world, and he is relentless. What makes this chapter of the story so devastating is that the gang does not realize the hunt is already in its final act. They see Milton as a nuisance, not a force capable of tearing apart everything they built. They cling to the idea that one last job will silence him forever. But the truth is harsher. Milton is not circling the gang. He has already encircled them. By the time Dutch plans the St. Denis bank robbery, Milton's presence is not in the distance. It is already in the walls, the windows, the very streets they walk through. He is the shadow following every step, waiting for the moment Dutch makes a mistake large enough to end it all. That moment will come soon. But first, Dutch will learn a different lesson, one that St. Denis teaches brutally. You cannot outsmart an enemy who already knows where you are going. And Dutch, blinded by pride, is heading exactly where Milton wants him. St. Denis is not just a city of industry and smoke. It is a theater, a place where power is performed, traded, and concealed behind velvet curtains and polished marble floors. And in this theater, Dutch van der Linde found an audience he had never known before. Men of wealth, men of influence, men who shaped the world with signatures rather than gunpowder. For a man who built his legend on defying civilization, Dutch begins acting strangely comfortable within its highest circles. His interactions during The Gilded Cage mark one of the most important tonal shifts in the entire story, because for the first time, Dutch is not simply fighting the elite. He is mingling with them. The moment he steps into the mayor's party, something in him changes. He stands taller, laughs louder, speaks with the charm of a man who believes he belongs among chandeliers and French wine. The wealthy Lemoyne aristocrats, Comte, Leviticus Cornwall's acquaintances, and a handful of sugar and railroad magnates eye him with a curiosity reserved for intriguing strangers. Dutch thrives on this attention. Arthur observes all of it with a guarded eye, noting in his journal how fancy folk live in a world utterly detached from the mud and blood of the frontier. But Dutch does not seem detached. He seems enthralled. What we witness here is not simple vanity. It is the beginning of Dutch's philosophical unraveling. For years, Dutch preached about freedom from civilization, the corrupting nature of government, the sanctity of the open world. But in St. Denis, he begins admiring the very structure he once condemned. He studies how the elites hold power, how they move people with words instead of bullets. He watches the mayor manipulate the room with effortless grace, weaving lies and half-promises with a smile. Dutch is not disgusted by this. He is impressed. His conversations with Mayor Lemieux and his circle reveal something unsettling. Dutch starts echoing their rhythms, speaking with a performative flourish that exaggerates even his normal theatrics. The change is subtle, but unmistakable. And Hosea, ever perceptive, notices. During the walk home after the party, He expresses unease about Bronte's influence. Hosea's tone is not jealous, it is fearful. He warns that Bronte has his own ends, and that his world is a dangerous one. Dutch dismisses the warnings with a lightness that feels inappropriate for a man who built his life on distrust. The truth is that Dutch isn't just walking among the elite. He's studying them, trying to understand how men like Bronte and Lemieux command obedience without ever drawing a weapon. Arthur senses this shift and writes later that Dutch seems to believe he can play their game better than they can. But the elite of St. Dennis are not playing a game. They are surviving in a system they built for themselves, one that outsiders like Dutch can admire but never truly join. The tragedy is that Dutch doesn't understand this. He sees inclusion where there is only mockery. He sees respect where there is curiosity. He sees alliance where there is manipulation. One of the clearest examples is his relationship with Angelo Bronte. Bronte acts as though he is Dutch's equal, a fellow outlaw who carved his own empire from the shadows of St. Denis. But Bronte holds something Dutch cannot replicate, legitimacy granted by the city itself. Bronte works with the police. Bronte influences judges. Bronte chooses who disappears and who thrives. Dutch sees a man with power, and he covets it without understanding its cost. In The Gilded Cage, Bronte jokes about politics with the mayor, calling the system a dance of lies. Dutch laughs, believing he understands the rhythm. But Bronte's dance is one of survival. Dutch's is one of delusion. And beneath the glitter of the chandeliers, the threads of betrayal begin to weave themselves into a noose. The mayor's circle views Dutch not as an equal, but as a useful outsider, someone who can be nudged toward violence against their rivals, someone whose desperation makes him predictable. Bronte feeds Dutch the idea of the bank job not as a gift, but as a trap. It is a move designed to remove a troublesome gang from the chessboard while benefiting Bronte politically and financially. Hosea senses this instantly. Arthur, too, though he remains more conflicted than afraid. But Dutch, blinded by admiration, hears only opportunity. He begins talking about the gang's future in grandiose terms, not simply escaping west, but striking a blow so powerful it makes a statement. This is not the Dutch of Horseshoe Overlook or even of Rhodes. This is a man intoxicated with the idea of performing greatness, of proving himself worthy of the rooms he has just walked through. He sees in St. Denis a chance to be more than an outlaw. He sees a chance to be legendary. But that ambition is built on a lie, and every step Dutch takes deeper into the elite world pushes him further from the man Hosea knew, from the man Arthur trusted, from the man the gang believed in. The city does not corrupt Dutch violently or suddenly. It does so gently, softly, through admiration and illusion. The city offers him a costume, sophistication, power, influence, and Dutch puts it on eagerly, forgetting that it is not real. His speeches become more abstract, his tone more theatrical. He begins using words like progress, destiny, and legacy, as though he is auditioning for a role only he can see. This is the Dutch who plans the Saint-Denis bank robbery, not as an escape, but as a performance. This is the Dutch who walks the streets imagining himself a man the city will remember, not a fugitive it will destroy. This is the Dutch who stops listening to Hosea's warnings because they no longer align with the fantasy forming in his mind. In these moments, quietly delivered between missions. Rockstar tells us the truth. Dutch did not break in the chaos of the heist. Dutch broke in the comfort of the ballroom. The applause of the elite was the first bullet, Bronte's flattery was the second, and Dutch's own pride was the third. The city does not change Arthur. It does not change Hosea. It does not change John, or Charles, or Lenny. It changes Dutch. And when a leader changes, the fate of everyone who follows him changes too. The philosophy he brings out of that party, grand, unrealistic, untethered, will guide every decision in the coming days. It will shape the heist. It will weaken his judgment. It will blind him to danger. It will be the beginning of his downfall. And for the gang standing at the edge of St. Denis, unaware of the storm gathering above the rooftops, the tragedy is already inevitable. By the time Dutch gathers the gang inside Doyle's tavern to discuss the St. Denis bank job, the heist feels less like a plan and more like a prophecy he's reciting. He speaks with a conviction so absolute that it drowns out every doubt in the room. And yet, if you listen closely, truly listen, you can hear the silence behind his words, the silence of a leader who no longer questions himself. The heist begins long before the vault door swings open. It begins with a seed planted by Angelo Bronte, watered by the city's illusions, and pushed upward by Dutch's growing hunger for grandeur. The idea is simple enough. Rob the largest bank in the most heavily policed city in Lemoyne, escape by boat, and vanish forever. Simple, if you believe you are untouchable. Dutch does, even as Hosea warns him that Bronte cannot be trusted. Dutch insists the information is good, the timing perfect, the opportunity irresistible. He frames it as a final act, a swan song of the gang's legendary run. To Arthur, though, something is already off. He writes in his journal that Dutch seems set on making a big gesture, noting that the plan feels more theatrical than strategic. Rockstar meticulously shows us Dutch's mindset in the lead-up to the heist. His swagger grows. His speeches become more philosophical, less practical. He talks about freeing ourselves once and for all, ignoring the chain of consequences tightening around them. What makes these scenes so haunting is how the gang responds. They don't cheer. They don't celebrate. They listen, cautiously. Hosea, sitting quietly beside Arthur, watches Dutch with a look players see only in this chapter of the game, a look that blends sorrow with helplessness. He has known Dutch longer than anyone else. He recognizes the signs of a man slipping into dangerous certainty. The plan itself is straightforward on paper. Dutch, Arthur, Lenny, and Karen enter the bank as customers. Karen creates a distraction by acting drunk and belligerent. Arthur controls the lobby. Lenny retrieves the manager. Dutch forces the vault open. Hosea and Abigail monitor the street from outside, keeping an eye on law presence. John ensures the boat is prepared for the escape. This division of roles is accurate to the mission, banking, the old American art. But what the mission doesn't say outright, what the story reveals between its lines, is that this plan is deeply flawed, not because of execution, not because of the gang's skill level, but because St. Denis is not Strawberry or Valentine. It is a modern city with telegraphs, organized police forces, and Pinkerton agents embedded in its core. Every detail Dutch ignores is another thread pulling the plan apart. When they scoped the bank earlier, Hosea points out concerns about patrols, timing, and visibility. Dutch waves these issues away. He speaks as though the world will simply bend to his will, as though confidence alone can silence a telegraph line or slow the response of an entire city. This is the Dutch who refuses to see how large the world has become. And in the shadows, Milton is waiting. Not because he somehow magically discovered the plan, but because Dutch's behavior has become predictable. Every time Dutch is confronted with pressure, he chooses escalation. Milton knows this. He reads Dutch's psychology better than Dutch reads the city. It's important to emphasize, nowhere in the game does Rockstar imply that Micah informed Milton specifically about the St. Denis heist at this stage. The canon explanation is simpler and more grounded. Milton has been watching them closely, and Dutch has become easy to anticipate. Milton understands Dutch's ego. He understands his increasing recklessness. He understands that when Dutch is wounded, he lashes out in grand gestures. The bank robbery is the grandest gesture of all. Before the mission begins, there is a brief exchange that foreshadows everything. Arthur expresses concern. Hosea expresses doubt. Dutch silences them with a calm, confident smile. "Trust me," he says, a phrase that once meant safety. Now, it feels like a warning. Inside the bank, the atmosphere shifts instantly. The marble floors, the heavy columns, the polished brass, these are not the familiar textures of the frontier. The gang stands inside a symbol of the new world, a world where men like Dutch are relics. Karen performs perfectly, drawing attention away from the others. Arthur handles the lobby with quiet command, the way he always does. Lenny retrieves the manager with efficiency and steadiness. Dutch pushes into the vault with theatrical precision, barking orders with a voice that sounds almost triumphant. For a moment, a fleeting, fragile moment, it looks like Dutch was right. They break open the safety deposit boxes. They gather bonds instead of cash, a detail that Dutch insists is smarter due to negotiability. Their bags fill. Their confidence swells. But outside, the world is already collapsing. Hosea's part of the plan is rarely discussed by players, yet it is vital. He and Abigail are meant to monitor the street, to warn Dutch if anything goes wrong. Hosea's instincts have always saved the gang. He was the strategist, the conscience, the tempering force. And this is precisely why Milton targets him first. When Agent sees Hosea near the bank steps, the gang inside remains unaware. There is no signal, no warning, no time to adjust. This is the first catastrophic failure in Dutch's plan. A failure not of execution, but of belief. Dutch believed that he still understood the world. He believed Bronte. He believed the city would behave like the frontier. He believed he was in control. He is not. As the vault door clinks open and Dutch scoops bonds into his bag, Rockstar quietly reveals the final truth of this chapter. The heist is already lost. The gang just doesn't know it yet. The streets outside are swarming. The Pinkertons have the building surrounded. The telegraph lines have already carried the alarm across the city. The mayor's allies have likely heard of the robbery before Arthur even steps out of the vault. And at the center of the chaos, Hosea Matthews, Dutch's oldest friend, mentor, and moral anchor, is being held at gunpoint. The plan is finished. The dream is collapsing. The tragedy is set. And in the heart of St. Denis, Dutch van der Linde is about to learn a lesson that will haunt him for the rest of his life. When you build a plan on illusions, the cost is paid in blood. There is a moment at the start of banking, the old American art, when everything feels painfully still. Karen steps into the lobby, her voice slurring, her performance so convincing that even Arthur seems caught off guard. The bank manager looks up, irritated but unsuspecting. The clerks exchange glances. The marble floor gleams beneath the gaslights. The entire room breathes in, unaware that history is about to split in two. For the Van der Linde gang, this is the threshold, the last calm inhale before the storm that will erase the world they once knew. Dutch stands tall, adjusting his coat, projecting a confidence that borders on theatrical. He has always been a performer, but today his performance feels almost desperate in its intensity. He wants the city to remember him. He wants his men to believe in him. And perhaps most of all, he wants to believe in himself. Arthur watches him closely. He always does. Arthur is the anchor, the quiet observer, the man who sees the truth even when he doesn't want to. In his journal, Arthur later describes the heist as Dutch at his boldest, but also as the moment he finally sensed something slipping, something subtle, but irreversible. Karen's scream breaks the stillness. She demands money, threatening the tellers with a drunken rage that masks the precision of her role. Dutch, Lenny, and Arthur move instantly, shedding the disguise of normalcy and stepping into their rehearsed positions. Guns are drawn, orders shouted. The room freezes under their control. Everything, for a handful of seconds, works exactly as Dutch imagined. Lenny seals the doors. Arthur forces the staff to the ground. Karen transitions smoothly from distraction to surveillance. Dutch ushers the manager toward the vault, his voice dropping into a tone that mixes charm with menace. The tension in these moments is deeply cinematic, but it is also profoundly tragic, because the coin does not yet understand the truth that the player knows. Pinkertons are already in place. Hosea is already compromised. Milton is already setting the stage for the execution that will shatter Dutch's soul. Inside the vault, Dutch's confidence swells. He speaks with a grin, mocking the bank manager, enjoying the dramatics. This is not the Dutch of Coulter or Horseshoe Overlook, the cautious planner, the philosopher, the leader. This is Dutch the showman, Dutch the gambler, Dutch the man who believes destiny protects him. The vault door creaks open. Dutch steps inside with the swagger of a man entering his own kingdom. He inspects the safety deposit boxes, barking for explosives, praising Lenny, demanding Arthur's help. Every motion is swift, decisive, and almost jubilant. Arthur, however, stays grounded. He notices the weight of the air, the distant sound of boots on the brick outside, the uneasy quiet settling over the city. It is as though St. Denis itself is holding its breath. Bonds fill their bags. Sheets of paper Dutch insists will be worth more than cash. Arthur complies, but he does not share Dutch's enthusiasm. He hears something in the distance. Not quite shouts. Not quite gunfire. Something worse. The sound of a city preparing to close its fist. In the lobby, Karen's expression shifts. Lenny senses movement in the street. Arthur looks up sharply, his instincts screaming for caution. But Dutch is lost in the triumph of the moment. He looks at the vault, the loot, the gang, and sees proof that he was right. Proof that he still controls the world. And then everything breaks. A single explosion of sound, sudden, violent, echoing off the marble, pierces the illusion. It is not inside the bank. It is outside. A crowd gasps. A voice shouts. Arthur rushes to the front windows, and there, framed by the stone arches of St. Denis, he sees the sight that will forever define the heist. Hosea Matthews, restrained by Pinkertons. Agent Milton standing beside him, wearing an expression of cold satisfaction. Arthur gasps. Karen freezes. Lenny's eyes widen with horror. Inside the vault, Dutch calls for an update, oblivious to the nightmare unfolding on the street. Rockstar presents this moment with a chilling sense of inevitability. There is no dramatic pause, no chance to alter the outcome. Time moves forward with merciless certainty. Milton raises his voice so Dutch can hear him from inside the bank. Then, in front of the entire city, he executes Hosea. The shot is deafening, not for its volume, but for what it signifies. It rips through the gang like a lightning strike, destroying the foundation of Dutch's world. Arthur's reaction is immediate and visceral. His journal entry will later describe the moment as the worst of all. Lenny stumbles back, shaken. Karen cries out. The bank manager collapses to his knees, trembling. Dutch goes silent. For the first time in the entire game, Dutch van der Linde loses his voice. The leader who always has a plan. The man who always has an answer. The outlaw who always has a speech. He says nothing. Because what do you say when the man who shaped your life, your partner, your conscience, your oldest friend, is murdered to punish you? The heist stops being a robbery. It becomes a funeral. Dutch staggers from the vault, staring at the street in disbelief. His voice, when it finally returns, is not the voice of a leader. It is the voice of a man breaking. He shouts, not to command, but to deny reality. He screams Hosea's name, a raw, grief-filled cry that echoes across the rooftops. And then the city erupts. Pinkertons flood the street. Gunfire tears through the windows. Arthur pulls Dutch back by force, saving him from a bullet he doesn't even see. Lenny shouts directions. Karen retreats behind the counters. The gang is trapped in a cage of stone, glass, and steel, exactly where Dutch never believed he could be caught. What follows is a frantic descent into chaos, the rooftop escape, the mounting casualties, the shattering of Dutch's composure. All of it flows directly from this single moment. The moment when Dutch van der Linde learns that his brilliance, his charisma, his pride, none of it can save the people he loves. Not in a city like St. Denis, not against a man like Milton, not anymore. The heist is still unfolding. The tragedy is still deepening. And Dutch's collapse, the true collapse, has only begun. There are moments in Red Dead Redemption 2 that feel less like scenes in a game and more like wounds that never fully heal. Hosea Matthews' death is one of them. Not because it is unexpected, the story has been tightening around him for hours, but because of what he represents. Hosea is not just Dutch's partner, he is Dutch's balance, his conscience, the quiet voice that kept the gang human. And in St. Denis, that voice is silenced forever. What makes this moment so devastating is the way Rockstar constructs it. There is no build-up, no dialogue exchange, no last words. Hosea is not given a heroic death, nor a chance to fight back. He is taken, held, displayed, executed, not as a target, as a message. When Arthur glimpses the situation from inside the bank, the world seems to narrow. The camera pulls tightly, the sound softens, and time seems to constrict around a single image. Hosea, restrained by Pinkertons, his expression fearful but dignified. He's older now, his limbs frail, his face tired. Yet he carries himself with the same kindness he always has, even in these final seconds. Agent Milton stands beside him with a look of smug satisfaction, his voice dripping with condescension as he calls out to Dutch. To Milton, this is the perfect strike, not arresting Dutch, not killing him, but breaking him. Hosea is the one man Dutch cannot replace, the one person he truly listens to, the only figure who could steer him away from disaster. Killing Hosea is not about justice. It is psychological warfare, and Milton understands Dutch's mind better than Dutch understands his own. When Milton pulls the trigger, Rockstar does something subtle yet powerful. The shot echoes differently. It is louder, sharper, hollow, and final. It rings with a kind of sorrow usually reserved for the end of an era, because that is exactly what this is. Hosea does not fall dramatically. He collapses softly, as though the world simply lets go of him. There is no last breath spoken to Arthur, no final wisdom, no heroic gesture, because real tragedy in RDR2 is not romantic. It is cold, sudden, irreversible. Arthur's reaction, it's immediate. A raw sound escapes him, shock mixed with grief. In his journal, he later writes of Hosea's death as unthinkable, the moment when everything he understood about Dutch began to change. Arthur has lost people before, but Hosea is different. Hosea is family in the deepest, oldest sense. Inside the bank, Karen gasps. Lenny whispers a grief-stricken curse. And Dutch does something players rarely see. He freezes. Dutch van der Linde, the charismatic outlaw king, the man of 100 speeches, the visionary always ready with a plan, becomes silent. The camera lingers on him just long enough to show the fracture. His breath stops. His eyes widen. His mouth hangs open slightly, as though the air itself has turned against him. He whispers Hosea's name once, shaky, broken, and in that single breath, the entire trajectory of the gang changes. Dutch is no longer Dutch. He is something hollowed, something wounded, something dangerous. The rooftop fight and the escape that follows are spectacular, but none of that would matter if not for this one instant. The instant Dutch loses the man who kept him tethered to reality. Let us revisit the relationship that makes this death so catastrophic. Hosea was with Dutch before the gang existed, before Arthur, before John. They traveled the country as con artists, partners not just in crime, but in vision. Dutch trusted Hosea's judgment more than anyone else's. When Hosea spoke, Dutch listened. When Hosea doubted, Dutch reconsidered. Without Hosea, Dutch's ideas had no filter, no restraint, no counterweight. Hosea's death doesn't just break Dutch's heart. It removes the last barrier between Dutch and his worst impulses. Rockstar reinforces this immediately. The moment Hosea dies, Dutch's behavior shifts. He rushes out of the bank, screaming in grief and rage, abandoning caution. Arthur must physically pull him back into cover to prevent him from being killed on the spot. He's not thinking. He's not leading. He's unraveling. The Pinkertons, of course, exploit this. Milton's decision is strategic, not emotional. Hosea's execution serves three purposes. First, it removes the gang strategist. Hosea is the planner, the negotiator, the man who tempers Dutch's visions. Second, it destabilizes Dutch psychologically. Milton wants Dutch desperate, reckless, predictable. Third, it sends a message to the entire gang. We know who you are, we know where you are, and we can kill any of you at any time. This triple blow lands perfectly. The gang is thrown into confusion. Their leader is shattered. Their plan is gone. From this point forward, the gang is not fighting to survive. They are fighting to stay coherent. Hosea's death is not just a tragedy. It is the fulcrum on which the entire narrative turns. Without Hosea, Dutch becomes suspicious, paranoid, unhinged. Arthur becomes more introspective and independent. John is pushed further to the margins. Micah gains influence in the vacuum. Everything that happens later at Beaver Hollow, every betrayal, every violent impulse, every moment of Dutch's moral decay, can be traced back to this loss. Rockstar even reinforces this symbolically. Throughout the game, Hosea carries books, writes notes, reads philosophy. He is the mind of the gang. His death is the death of reason. As the escape begins, Arthur forces Dutch to move, to think, to act. But Dutch moves like a ghost. His voice wavers. His commands lack authority. Even his posture is different, hunched, unsteady, bewildered. He's no longer the man Arthur once followed with full faith. And the player understands, perhaps before Dutch himself does. Hosea is gone. The gang will not recover. Dutch will never be the same. This is the moment Dutch's downfall truly begins, not with the failed escape, not with Quarma, not with Micah's whispers, but with the sight of Hosea falling lifeless on the steps of the Saint Denis Bank. It is the moment Dutch's dream dies, and the man who emerges from that grief is not a leader anymore. He is the echo of one. When the first bullets tear through the windows of the Saint Denis Bank, the world does not simply break, it shatters. Glass rains across the marble floor, people scream in the street, and inside the crumbling vault of Dutch's last great dream, the Van der Linde gang watches their future close like a trap. But the loudest thing in that moment is not the gunfire. It is Dutch's silence. Dutch Van der Linde, a man whose life is built on speeches, commands, stories, and golden words, stands paralyzed. His eyes are fixed on the street where Hosea fell. He does not blink. He does not breathe. He does not lead. Arthur sees it immediately. This is not shock. This is collapse. For years, Dutch carried himself like a prophet of the dying West. He could unify a room with a single sentence. He could convince desperate men to follow him into the snow, the desert, the swamp. He had charisma so radiant it felt like safety. But Hosea was the foundation beneath that charisma, the quiet voice that reminded Dutch of the difference between vision and delusion. And now that voice is gone. Everything that happens next, the rooftop escape, the chaos in the alleys, the deadly climb through the belly of Saint Denis, unfolds with a single unspoken truth hovering over every step. Dutch is no longer in control. Arthur feels it. Lenny feels it. Every surviving gang member feels it. The leadership that once pulled them forward is now weighing them down. When Arthur grabs Dutch and drags him behind the vault door to avoid a Pinkerton bullet, Dutch resists for only a moment, not out of strategy, but confusion. His voice cracks when he finally speaks. He mutters Hosea's name over and over, as if saying it aloud could undo the irreversible. Dutch is grieving, violently, immediately, painfully, but he is also breaking in a deeper, more permanent way. Because Dutch is not a man who loses people. He is a man who refuses to lose people. He glamorizes sacrifice. He romanticizes struggle. But in his story, death is something that always happens to others, never to those he needs. And losing Hosea is losing half of himself. The Pinkertons storm the bank, filling the room with smoke and screams. Arthur has no time to process anything. He pushes Dutch toward the stairs, shouting instructions that Dutch would normally give. The roles invert. Arthur becomes the leader. Dutch becomes the burden. This shift is subtle, but canonically perfect. Rockstar shows Dutch stumbling behind Arthur, slow to react, occasionally mumbling, often silent. He does not shape events. He is shaped by them. On the rooftop, Lenny takes point. Arthur covers him. Dutch trails behind, wild-eyed, crouching low as bullets crack overhead. He is not leading his men to safety. They are hauling him toward it. The rooftop chase is one of the most symbolic sequences in the entire game. The player sees St. Denis from above, its factories, its crowded streets, its endless sprawl of brick and steel. This is the world Dutch thought he could defy, and it is swallowing him whole. The Pinkertons pour across the rooftops, shouting orders, firing relentlessly. The city seems to pulse with law enforcement, every alley birthing another wave of armed men. This is not the frontier. This is not a town with one sheriff and a handful of deputies. This is civilization. And Dutch is realizing in real time that civilization has already won. When they reach the upper balcony overlooking the street, Lenny climbs ahead, momentarily exposed. Arthur warns him. Too late. Lenny is shot and killed instantly. The blow lands like a second hammer, striking Dutch's already splintered heart. Lenny, the brightest young soul in the gang, the man with boundless potential, the loyal, sharp, hopeful outlaw who still believed they could make it out alive. Dutch gasps when he sees Lenny's body fall. He whispers, "No, not Lenny too." His voice trembles. His hands shake. This is the moment Dutch truly breaks. Hosea's death wounded him. Lenny's death crushes him. 2 lives lost in moments, both under his leadership, both because of his plan. Dutch, for the first time in the game, looks genuinely afraid. Not afraid of dying. Dutch has always been fearless in that regard. But afraid of the truth. He is the reason they are here. He is the reason they are dying. He is the architect of this catastrophe. Arthur grabs Dutch again, dragging him across the roof as Pinkertons fire from below. In his journal, Arthur later writes that Dutch seemed bewildered, frightened, and not himself. He notes that Dutch barely spoke, and when he did, it was fragmented, grief-soaked nonsense. For a gang built entirely on faith in one man, watching that man unravel is worse than the bullets flying overhead. And yet, the tragedy is not in Dutch's collapse. It is in what his collapse creates. In the absence of calm leadership, in the absence of strategy, in the absence of Hosea, someone else steps into the vacuum. Micah. And from this moment forward, Dutch is no longer guided by reasoned partnership. He is guided by the one man who thrives on chaos, manipulation, and bloodshed. The rooftop escape is frantic, a blur of gunfire and desperate movement. When Arthur and Dutch reach the tram line, Dutch no longer speaks with certainty. He mumbles half-commands that Arthur must reinterpret. Arthur now thinks for both of them. When they reach the docks, Dutch offers the worst, most fatal line of the entire mission. "We can still make it. We have to make it." This is not strategy. This is denial. Dutch is not planning anymore. He is clinging to a fantasy, to a dream, to a life that no longer exists. And the harder he clings, The faster everything falls apart. The boat explodes. The remaining survivors are scattered. The gang is forced into the ocean, washed away toward an island none of them have ever heard of. And in those final seconds before the waves swallow them, Arthur looks at Dutch and sees not a leader, not a visionary, not the man who raised him, but a man who is lost, a man who has no plan, a man who is broken. Dutch's collapse is not loud or violent. It is quiet. It is internal. It is the moment he stops being the man the gang believed in and becomes a man chasing an illusion. Hosea's death broke his heart. Lenny's death broke his mind. And the escape from St. Denis breaks his legacy. This is the Dutch the gang will follow into Guarma. This is the Dutch who returns to Beaver Hollow. This is the Dutch who spirals into paranoia and cruelty, not because he is evil, not because he wanted this, but because on the rooftops of St. Denis, in the smoke and fire and sorrow, Dutch van der Linde finally faced the one thing he could never outsmart: failure. And the Dutch who rises from that realization is not the same man who entered the bank. He never will be again. When the gang finally bursts out of the choking smoke of St. Denis and onto the moonlit docks, there is no strategy left, no speeches, no plans, only the raw instinct to flee. The city behind them glows with lantern fire and muzzle flashes. The streets echo with Pinkerton shouts, the clatter of boots, the metallic crush of the industrial age closing in around the last outlaws of a dying frontier. St. Denis, the place Dutch thought he could outsmart, has swallowed Hosea, swallowed Lenny, swallowed every illusion he carried into it. And now it wants the rest of them. Arthur pulls Dutch forward, half dragging, half supporting him, as he stumbles like a man walking through a nightmare. Dutch mutters incoherently, lost in the fog of grief and shock. Gone is the man who entered the bank with theatrical bravado. Gone is the voice that once steadied the gang. In his place stands someone hollowed out, someone who can no longer see past the next desperate step. The survivors, John, Sadie, Javier, Bill, converge in the chaos of the docks, breathless and wide-eyed. Everyone is searching for answers, but there are none. Only the crashing rhythm of the river, the glowing city behind them, and the cold truth that the Pinkertons are seconds away. The boat waits at the pier, its engine churning, its lights dimmed to avoid attention. This was supposed to be the gang's salvation, the vessel that would carry them to freedom. Now, it feels like a lifeboat on a sinking world. Arthur shoves Dutch aboard. The others follow. Bullets snap through the planks. The gang crouches low as the crew shoves off with frantic urgency. When the boat finally pulls away from the wharf, the city of St. Denis recedes into the mist. And with it, everything the gang once believed in. The glittering lights blur, the whistles fade, the shadows swallow the rooftops where Lenny fell. Arthur watches the skyline disappear, and he feels something inside him shift, a sense that they have crossed a point of no return. He writes later that he has never seen Dutch so shaken, noting the terrible quiet that descends over the boat. Dutch sits alone near the stern, staring into the black water. His posture is slumped, defeated. The grief clings to him like a second skin. No words pass his lips. For a man who built his power on voice, this silence is terrifying. Not long afterward, thunder breaks across the river. A storm rises, violent and sudden, nature itself mirroring the chaos the gang carries with them. Rain lashes the deck, waves slam the hull. The boat creaks and groans as the storm tears at it with ruthless force. The gang scrambles to hold on. Arthur fights against the wind, gripping the railing as lightning ignites the sky in bright, momentary flashes. In one of those flashes he sees Dutch's face, wet with rain, gaunt, distant, lost. The storm worsens. A massive wave hurls the boat sideways. Crates slide. Crewmen shout. The deck splits with a deafening crack as seawater floods in. Arthur is thrown into the railing. John is swept across the deck. Charles tries to fight the current. Sadie grips a rope with both hands, screaming Dutch's name over the roar of the wind. But Dutch does not respond. In the chaos, a final catastrophic wave engulfs the vessel. The wooden planks shatter. The stern collapses inward, and the gang is cast into the ocean like leaves torn from a tree. Arthur plunges into blackness. For a moment, there's nothing but cold and silence and the crushing pull of the sea. Then, faintly, he hears the echo of Dutch's voice, not calling orders, not preaching, but crying out in fear. When Arthur claws his way toward the surface, gasping, the world has changed. The storm rages above him, but the boat is gone. The gang is scattered in the waves, silhouettes rising and falling between flashes of lightning. Hours pass in a blur of exhaustion and instinct. The survivors cling to debris, fighting to stay alive, pulled wherever the ocean wills. Arthur drifts in and out of consciousness. Memories flash, Hosea falling, Lenny's body collapsing, Dutch's broken stare, and then sand. Arthur awakens coughing seawater onto a sun-baked shore. Palm trees sway above him. Birds call from the dense jungle beyond. The air is hot, humid, fragrant with the scent of flowers he does not recognize. This is not Lemoyne, not New Hanover, not any land the gang has ever seen. This is Guarma, a place outside the map, outside American law, outside the world. Dutch once thought he understood. Other survivors wash ashore. Dutch, Javier, Bill, Micah, eventually Arthur himself. Some are half-conscious. Some cry out for missing friends. All are shaken. Dutch rises from the sand, dripping, trembling, eyes distant. He scans the shoreline, sees no civilization, no sign of hope. Only jungle and ocean and the crushing isolation of a land far from home. His posture stiffens. A new expression forms on his face, one that Arthur recognizes instantly. Not grief, not fear, denial. Dutch refuses to accept the reality before him. He tells the gang they will regroup, that this is just another challenge, that the world hasn't beaten them yet. But his voice lacks the conviction it once carried. The cracks show through every word. Arthur watches Dutch closely, knowing the truth. Dutch didn't lose himself in Guarma. He lost himself in St. Denis. Guarma is just where the broken pieces begin to scatter. From this moment on, Dutch's grief transforms into something colder, harder, more dangerous. He begins to rewrite the narrative in his mind. Hosea's death becomes an excuse. Lenny's death becomes a justification. Guarma becomes a proving ground for a leader who refuses to admit he has failed. This island, sunlit and beautiful, yet merciless, becomes the birthplace of the new Dutch van der Linde, a man shaped not by freedom, but by loss, not by vision, but by paranoia, not by love for his gang, but by the fear of losing anything ever again. Guarma does not break Dutch. It molds what remains of him into something unrecognizable. And when the gang finally leaves this island, the Dutch who walks back onto American soil is not the man Arthur once loved. That Dutch is gone. Forever. When the gang finally returns from Guarma, limping through the misty forests of Von Horn and collapsing at the edge of Beaver Hollow, it is clear that something has shifted, not just in their circumstances, but in Dutch himself. The man who stands before them is still Dutch van der Linde in voice and face, but the center of him, the part built by decades of partnership with Hosea, the part held steady by vision and restraint, is gone. Guarma did not create this version of Dutch. St. Denis did. Guarma merely hardened him. The Dutch who emerges from the jungle is a man who survived catastrophe, but not unchanged. He carries himself like a wounded animal, nursing invisible scars. He speaks more sharply. He listens less. The warm theatrical charm he once wielded so naturally is replaced by something colder, something distrustful, something tinged with desperation. Beaver Hollow, a damp, dark cave in the heart of the Roanoke Ridge, becomes the perfect reflection of his new state of mind. It is cramped, isolated, hidden from the world, a place chosen not for comfort or strategy, but for fear. Dutch calls it a temporary camp, but everyone knows the truth. The gang has retreated into a hole, both physically and emotionally. Arthur sees the signs immediately. Dutch paces more. His eyes dart constantly toward the tree line. He speaks of plans and opportunities, but they lack substance. He gives long, winding speeches that echo in the cave like ghosts of the man he used to be. In one of Arthur's journal entries, he writes bluntly, "Dutch seems altered." It is the most understated description of the most important transformation in the entire game. The once careful mastermind now makes decisions from impulse rather than intellect. The man who once said, "We don't kill innocents," begins justifying violence without hesitation. The leader who once valued loyalty above all else now suspects betrayal in every shadow, and into this fragile, unstable space walks the worst possible influence. Micah Bell. Micah, opportunistic by nature, senses the shift in Dutch immediately. He moves closer, whispers more, challenges Arthur's authority, and offers Dutch something he desperately craves: validation. Where Hosea once questioned Dutch with love and wisdom, Micah praises him with empty flattery. Where Arthur once urged caution, Micah urges action. Where the gang once guided Dutch toward balance, Micah pulls him toward extremity. Dutch begins echoing Micah's sentiments, repeating lines that feel foreign on his tongue. We have to be strong. We can't have traitors. They turned on us first. These are not ideas born of vision. These are defenses built from fear, and fear becomes Dutch's new foundation. The Pinkertons' presence around Beaver Hollow only deepens his paranoia. Agent Milton's taunts haunt him like a specter. He paces the camp with a restless intensity, convinced the world conspires against him. Every misfortune becomes a betrayal. Every challenge becomes a personal attack. The loss of Hosea left a void Dutch can no longer admit exists. The death of Lenny tore open that void. Guarma filled it with rage. Now, back in America, that rage needs a target. At first, it is the law, understandable, even righteous in Dutch's mind. He dreams again of one last plan, one last escape, one last strike that will free them all. But the plans are not plans. They are fantasies wrapped in rhetoric. And Arthur sees this with painful clarity. Their conversations, once warm and fatherly, now feel strained. Dutch's responses are clipped, suspicious. He looks at Arthur with the eyes of a man searching for betrayal, not loyalty. Arthur, battling tuberculosis and running out of time, grows increasingly desperate for truth. But every attempt to reason with Dutch meets the same response. "You've lost faith in me, Arthur." It is the line of a wounded man, and it is the line of a man who knows deep down that the criticism is justified, but cannot face it. Meanwhile, Dutch's behavior worsens. He strikes John across the face during a confrontation, a moment unthinkable before St. Denis. He refuses to rescue John from Sisika, dismissing him with a coldness that shocks the entire camp. He talks of sacrifice, of necessity, of what needs to be done, but these words now mask cruelty rather than purpose. Arthur confronts him gently, more than once, but Dutch reacts with anger each time. He accuses Arthur of betrayal, manipulation, disloyalty, the very traits Micah quietly embodies. The irony is devastating. Dutch, once a man who hated tyranny, now begins exercising it. He listens only to voices that confirm his fears. He makes decisions based on emotion, not strategy. He grows erratic, unpredictable, violent. One of the most symbolic scenes occurs when Dutch chooses to leave John behind during the train robbery. Arthur shouts in disbelief. Sadie screams that John is alive, but Dutch looks her in the eye and lies with chilling ease. That's the end of him. This is not a tactical call. This is the decision of a man afraid of losing control, a man who would rather abandon a loyal member than admit he made a mistake. Contrast this with the Dutch of early chapters, who risked the entire gang to save Arthur in Blackwater years earlier. The change is devastating. And all of it, every shift, every fracture, every cruel decision, traces back to that moment outside the St. Denis Bank when Hosea's body hit the ground. Arthur confronts Dutch about his behavior later at Beaver Hollow, and Dutch's face twists with something between pain and anger. He insists he still has a plan. He insists everything is under control. But Arthur no longer believes him. Worse, Dutch no longer believes himself. The final unraveling begins when Abigail is kidnapped. Dutch, instead of organizing a rescue, accuses Arthur and others of betrayal. Micah whispers in his ear. Dutch listens. And each time he listens, he falls a little further from who he once was. The gang splinters, tension boils, Arthur's tragedy deepens, and Dutch, once the beating heart of a family, becomes the architect of its dissolution. The Dutch who walks out of Beaver Hollow is a man driven by wounded pride, paranoia, and Micah's manipulations, not by love, not by vision, not by hope. He is a man who has rewritten his story, so he doesn't have to face what really haunts him. It wasn't the world that broke the gang. It wasn't the Pinkertons. It wasn't the law. It was the bank in St. Denis. It was Hosea's death. It was Dutch's inability to carry the weight of grief. The man who returns is not the man who left, and Arthur knows, with growing sorrow, that the worst is still to come. In the fading twilight of Beaver Hollow, as the smoke of dying campfires rises into the cold air, and the trees whisper with the sound of a world moving on without them, the truth becomes impossible to ignore. The St. Denis bank job was not merely a disaster. It was the fulcrum upon which the entire Van der Linde gang shattered. Every death, every betrayal, every whispered doubt, every desperate decision that followed traces back to a single moment. The shot that ended Hosea Matthews' life. Dutch's collapse did not happen over weeks or months. It happened in seconds. It happened on the steps of a bank, under lantern light, with the entire city watching. For years, Dutch built his identity around being the man who could always see a way through. He prided himself on outsmarting lawmen, outmaneuvering rivals, inspiring loyalty through vision and charisma. But when Hosea fell, quietly, gracelessly, without last words or warning, Dutch was confronted with something he had never defeated: reality. A reality where he could not protect the people he loved. A reality where his brilliance was not enough. A reality where the world had grown too large, too fast, too organized for men like him. That moment broke something fundamental inside him. From that fracture came everything that followed. Micah's rise to influence, Arthur's waning faith, Jon's abandonment, the instability of Beaver Hollow, the violence that Dutch once avoided, but now embraced, the paranoia that turned friends into enemies in his mind. Dutch's tragedy is not that he became evil. It is that he became lost inside a story he once believed he controlled, lost inside a dream that could no longer survive the modern world. Rockstar reveals this decline subtly through dialogue and action rather than exposition. At Beaver Hollow, Dutch speaks of one last score, but the words feel hollow, recycled. The spark behind his eyes that once drew the gang together is gone. His voice, once warm and contagious, now trembles with defensive bravado. Arthur sees it more clearly than anyone else, not because he has lost love for Dutch, but because he once believed in him so deeply. Their final confrontations are soaked in sorrow, not hatred. When Arthur says, "We can't keep doing this," he is not rebelling. He is pleading. Dutch hears judgment instead of love, pain instead of truth. The St. Denis trauma has reshaped Dutch's perception of loyalty itself. To him, loyalty becomes synonymous with silence. Questioning means betrayal. Reason means opposition. And the only voice he trusts is the one that tells him he is still right, Micah Bell's. Micah becomes the shadow Dutch clings to in the darkness Hosea left behind. This is the great tragedy of Dutch van der Linde. He does not choose corruption. He chooses comfort. He chooses the voice that soothes him rather than the voice that challenges him. He chooses the illusion of strength over the reality of vulnerability. And the reality is simple. Dutch never recovered from St. Denis. When Arthur confronts Dutch for the last time atop the cliffs of Beaver Hollow, the emotional weight of the moment lies not in their conflict, but in Dutch's expression. He looks defeated, confused, haunted. He looks like a man who cannot understand how things have come to this, even though, deep down, he knows exactly when it began. Arthur's final plea, "You're better than this," hangs in the air like a dying ember. Dutch does not respond with anger or certainty. He responds with a shaken, broken whisper, "I tried. In the end, I did." It is one of the most honest things Dutch says in the entire game, and it reveals everything. Dutch is not lying. He did try. He tried to protect his gang. He tried to build a better life. He tried to outrun a world that no longer had room for men like him. But the moment Hosea died, Dutch lost the part of himself capable of accepting failure. And without that part, his dream became a cage rather than a sanctuary. By the time Dutch leaves Arthur to his fate and flees into the mountains, the transformation is complete. He is no longer the man Arthur loved. He is no longer the man who rescued Jon from a bounty wagon. He is no longer the man who carried Arthur through the blizzard at Coulter. He is the echo of a dream that St. Denis destroyed. Years later, when Dutch stands in Micah's cabin with John Marston and Sadie Adler, the strain of that echo finally snaps. He shoots Micah, not out of loyalty to John, not out of redemption, but because Dutch finally recognizes the truth he has spent years running from. Micah did not destroy the gang. Pinkertons did not destroy the gang. The world did not destroy the gang. Dutch did. And the moment it happened, the instant the dream died, was the moment he watched Hosea fall on the steps of that bank. In the quiet mountain air after Micah's death, Dutch says nothing. He simply walks away, carrying with him the weight of a lifetime of choices and the shadow of the one moment he could never undo. A man broken not by bullets, not by betrayal, but by grief. A grief born in St. Denis. A grief that shaped the end of the Van der Linde gang. A grief that haunted Dutch for the rest of his life. The story ends not with Dutch's redemption or condemnation, but with his emptiness. The emptiness of a man who once saw himself as a savior and lived long enough to realize he was the ruin. The St. Denis bank job did not just go wrong. It destroyed everything.